Hello and welcome to Media Reporter. I'm your host, Driga, and our guest today is a professor of law. He's an expert in mental health advocacy. He is teaching in law school and beyond. He's using distance learning. Professor Michael Perlin, hi and welcome.
Hello, and it's very good to be here. Thank you.
Well, good to see you again. We're always happy to see you. Let me ask you the first question.
Sure.
You have this wonderful career in which you're embarking on this venture of establishing an international organization in Southeast Asia to defend the human rights with the mental health disabilities.
Right.
Could you please tell us about it?
Sure. I've been a lawyer for many years, and almost my entire career has always been devoted to representing persons with mental disabilities. I've been teaching here in New York Law School since 1984, and starting in the year 2000, I shifted my focus a little bit from domestic cases to international cases. I began to do work in Central and Eastern Europe. Then I did work in Central and South America, a little bit of work in Africa.
Yeah, please tell us where you...
But most of the work that I have done in the last 10 years has been in Asia. I've done work, a lot of work in Japan, some back in mainland China. I'm just back from China 2 weeks ago. Some work in Taiwan and Hong Kong and South Korea. But the focus of what I've been doing, I've been working with my friend and colleague, Yoshi Ikuhara, who is the director of the Tokyo Advocacy Law Office, and we are trying to create a disability rights tribunal for Asia and the Pacific. And let me explain a little bit about that. In Europe, there is a regional court on human rights that extends from England to Russia. In South America, there's an Inter-American Court on Human Rights. In Africa, there's an African Court on Human Rights. The only region of the world that does not have a regional human rights commission is Asia.
Really?
Yes, for a whole lot of reasons. First of all, Asia is a huge continent. I mean,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
Geographically diverse. It's ethnically
and
very
a big population.
A huge population, and it's also nations that don't want to give up any of their own sovereignty, because when you join into a regional court, what you're saying is judges who may be from another nation may issue decisions that may have an impact on your citizens. And Asia has always been resistant. So Yoshi's, and this was really Yoshi's idea, I've been working with him, was that if it doesn't look as if Asia is going to have a full human rights court or commission, to create one solely to do disability rights cases. And he and I started working on this, I guess about four or 5 years ago, and then last year, in the summer of '09, we were in Tokyo and had the first regional meeting. Since then, we had a meeting in Korea. He had a meeting I did not go to in Australia, and as I'll be telling you about later, we have another meeting coming up in Thailand. The idea is to bring under our umbrella, so to speak.
So now you're talking about China, right?
Well, China is a little bit different, because China is a nation I would very, very much like to be part of this. I'm not sure they will. Let me back up just a little bit.
Please.
The United Nations 2 years ago ratified a new document, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's the strongest, boldest document ever in international law on behalf of persons with disabilities, mental and physical. And this was after about 10 years of work. China has signed that document. China has ratified that document. So China has, at least on paper, committed itself to enforcement. I would very, very much like China to be part of this. Frankly, I don't know. As I may have said before, I'm just back from Beijing. I was there 2 weeks ago speaking at a conference run by Renmin University, which is one of the major law schools there, it was an international disability rights conference. And my presentation was to sort of urge Chinese advocates and human rights workers and professors to get behind this idea to get China to become part of this tribunal. Are we going to be successful? I don't know. But point though is, there are people in Japan who are committed, that are in Korea who are committed, in Australia who are committed, in Thailand who are committed, and we are trying to bring other nations, as I say, under the umbrella. And of course, Yoshi, who's in Asia, is able to do this obviously much better than I can, sitting in New York City. But what I try to do when I go to these is to offer both theoretical and real life reasons, like why it'd be valuable for these nations to do this. And I'm very excited about this work.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you about China. Why would China, for instance, having been accused of violating human rights, be willing to allow this organization to tell them what to do?
Driga, that's one of the hardest questions that there are. And China really poses a very interesting and very difficult problem. Because you're right, China's record in terms of dealing with persons with mental disabilities and also people who may not be mentally disabled, but who are treated as mentally disabled in order to suppress their political activities, members of Falun Gong. You may have seen on 42nd Street by 12th Avenue, across from the embassy, you see people doing what sort of look like Tai Chi exercises. Those are the Falun Gong. And they've been locked up, in many cases, for months and years. China's record is not good. In fact, remind me, I'll tell you later about a book which I'm just finishing that has a whole chapter on that. So you've got that on one side, and you have a history in China of state psychiatrists really kind of cooperating with the government. But I was in China 2 weeks ago, and I met with professors from 2 different law schools who appeared interested in signing on to take courses. You mentioned at the beginning of this, when you introduced me, that I run an online mental disability law program, and I've done courses in Japan and in Nicaragua. I've taught these courses in Israel and in Finland, but I had lunch 2 weeks ago, Monday, I guess, with a professor from Renmin University, and then 2 days later, I had coffee with professors from the China University of Politics and Law to talk about maybe creating a joint program. And of course, between people saying it's going to happen and it happens, there's a lot of space.
It seems like they should be interesting to set up this organization.
I hope they are. And if they do that, one of the issues, and one of the really important issues is this. If this organization, if this tribunal gets created and there's a body there of that would hear cases, who's going to represent them? Who are the lawyers going to be? And unfortunately, in Asia, there is not a very strong tradition of lawyers becoming advocates for this population. There is in the US, there is in Australia, New Zealand, England, Israel, a couple of other places, but generally in Asia and the civil law nations, no. So one of the things that we want to do through New York Law School is to create partnerships where we can train young lawyers and law students. We have in our program now 13 different courses, and we cover every possible aspect of mental disability law. So if we can, create a partnership, if we can make it sort of work out financially for everybody, that means we'd be in a position to teach students in China, and that means they would then be empowered to be able to go and actually do these kinds of cases, which would be so exciting. And I really hope that would work. So that's one of the things I'm working on.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I've read your papers.
Well, good.
About this organization in Southeast Asia. And what it stands out to me is that there is a desire to establish a common language for this organization. And how do you plan including all these countries and cultures to be open and sensitive to understand and work towards to the same goal?
That's a great question, and it's a hard question. I'll answer the easier one first.
I know.
And so that's good. Yoshi and I think when we were in Korea in March, we realized that it would be impossible to start this organization covering all of Asia and all of the Pacific because of geography and because you've got countries like China and India with hundreds of millions of people, and some of the little nations in the Pacific have probably fewer people in the nation than we have students in New York Law School. So we decided it doesn't make sense to try to start it all like that. So we are beginning with a sub-regional program where we will do the Pacific Rim, which would be Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Australia, New Zealand, and hopefully some of the nations from Southeast Asia, Thailand, but I would love to see of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, at least one of those. Start there, see how that works for a few years, and then expand. The question of culture, and this is something, it's so important, and I spend, in this new book that I'm writing, I spend a whole chapter on this, because there's all sorts of cultural issues, and there's a debate that really rages about what are called Asian values. And I've been reading about it and studying about it and talking to people, and it's really kind of formulated my thinking. Most of those who say there are Asian values that are different and they're different in the West, those people don't speak for all Asians. Those are generally the people who are in power in relatively authoritarian states, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and they are invariably male, they're invariably rich, and they're invariably older. And they want things to be, frankly, just the way they've been, which means they keep power. If you talk to people in Asia who are younger, who come from minority ethnicities, who are women, who may not be very well off, who may be gay, have different backgrounds than the people who are saying this, they have a very different position. And they seem to endorse almost precisely the same kinds of human rights values that people in the West do. The other issue is, talk about, kind of Confucian values, but there's also the Buddhist tradition. I've done a lot of reading about Buddhism over the years, and certainly if you do Buddhist reading, you see that an awful lot of what's being said is very, very similar to these universal human rights feelings of other religions in Asia. So it's not uniform. It's not one homogeneous view. And I think, well, that makes things more difficult because you're bringing people from a lot of sort of different perspectives beneath this banner. It's also good because it shows you that there's not a one-size-fits-all to it.
Yeah, because I was thinking in South of East Asia, so many different languages. Like, it even reminds me of ATM. When I'm taking money, I can do it in many languages. When I buy a television, it goes with instructions, with 10 languages or so. Like, and I was thinking, it's going to be so much important.
That's an issue. It's a very, very important issue. Now, the United Nations, everything is, I think there's 6 languages that the United Nations use. When I do these programs, there was always going to be a translator. Things get lost in translation. As you know that. I mean, Russian is your native language and you speak English, but sometimes I know if I'm ever trying to speak a different language, I'm going to be going to France, and I can speak a little bit of French, but I may be saying the word that's in the dictionary, but my nuance might not be right. My inflection might not be right. And that's an issue, and it's certainly an issue in these cases. We're going to have to decide. We're not there yet. That's kind of the next set of issues as to which languages to use. One of the issues is where will the judges be from? Some international tribunals reserve seats for judges from certain nations. So there may be one judge from Japan, one judge from France, one judge from the US. I'm not sure if we should do that or whether or not the judges should be selected in a different way. And these are the things we're working on. One of the courses, I should tell you, and you may not know this, one of the courses that I'm teaching at New York Law School this semester, and this whole year actually, it's part of our project-based learning program. I have 6 students working with me, helping me work on the blueprint for this tribunal. And one of the questions, and they're looking at about 8 or 9 different issues, and one of them is how the judges are selected, where they're from, should there be a set-aside, how do we ensure independence? These aren't easy questions, and we're working on it, but we have to, Driga, we have to sort of embrace the hard issues, because if not, it's going to fail. We have to kind of sit back and say, yeah, this is difficult, this is going to be difficult stuff, but we need to move on with it that way.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Also, it's very interesting because setting on this venture of establishing an international organization in Southeast Asia sounds like it will cost a lot of money. So if so, how will it be funded?
That's a good question. One, we are hoping that, even though this is going to be voluntary, we're hoping the United Nations will help support us. So far, the money for this, the seed money for creating it, has come from a private foundation, but they're clearly not going to support the whole tribunal. They're supporting us in our efforts to get the tribunal underway. So that's it. I have talked, when I was in Korea, I talked to a woman who is a Japanese woman living in Thailand, who was an officer for the United Nations. It's called SCAP, which is Economic, Social, Cultural, blah, blah. And she believes that the United Nations will endorse this. It's going to be, there's something called the Decade of Disabled Persons, and every decade they choose, I think, 10 things to focus on. I think we're going to be one of those 10. So that's number one. Number two, there are many different voluntary tribunals in the world. And I have to tell you, I started studying this. I was amazed to find that out. Tribunals about the law of the seas. There's one about reparations for Holocaust victims when
Wow.
the Nazis stole, paintings and jewelry. How to get money back to the descendants.
Yeah.
There's some of the African tribunals where there've been these horrible genocides. Some of them are in fact voluntary, and the governments actually put in some money. And for some of these, I think we can go. The European Union supports programs all over the world, outside of Europe. But I think for some of these, we could also go to foundations and say, look, you can spend your money here, you can spend your money there. If you spend your money here with us, you're going to be supporting something that's never been before,
Yeah.
that's giving potentially millions of people a voice, people who have been marginalized, people who have never had an opportunity to speak. I wrote, one of the books that I wrote, 10
Yes.
years ago,
Yeah, please.
was called The Hidden Prejudice, because it's that everything is invisible. And we hope by doing this tribunal, we will make to some extent the invisible visible. So I am thinking we can go and do that. Again, down the road a little bit, and it also depends, frankly, on which nations we sign up.
Mhm.
I mean, there are certainly foundations in Japan, there's certainly foundations in Australia. Excuse me, and I think, depending on who we get to be part of our team, that will give us some direction as to where we go.
Exactly. Yeah. What do they have? Like how you can get together, what everybody has already.
Exactly, exactly.
And also, I have a question for you. You've been doing distance learning.
Yes.
It's about over 10 years
10
now.
years, yeah.
And how do you think this has helped the society? And I want to hear some specific examples or
This
something.
is actually an easy one for me to answer.
Okay.
Dean Richard Madisar came to New York Law School in the year 2000 and said, who's interested in doing distance learning? So I raised my hand, said, put me in, coach, I'll play center field. And I'd been on, for someone of my generation, I got my first computer in 1984.
Ooh.
And I know, right, exactly. And I started talking to people through chat rooms, actually, before Windows. I am one of those people who was on a DOS-based chat room, if you can believe it, in 1993. Our cameraman is smiling, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm very comfortable with it. I know an awful lot of my age peers, it's still like, it's a different world. So I said, I'd love to do it. We started doing these courses, and I had this kind of wow moment that I realized through these courses. Right now, in my, I just taught civil procedure in room W302. Well, I had 45 people, all of whom live in New York City or can commute to New York City on a daily basis. But through distance learning, we can get to people all over the world. Here's some facts. The most important mental disability advocacy group in Eastern and Central Europe is called Mental Disability Advocacy Center. They're centered in Estonia and in Hungary.
Mm.
2 students who took our course in International Human Rights and Mental Disability Law are now among their lead litigators. And they got those jobs in no question in my mind at all,
Wow.
in large part because of that. I've had students from